My mother-in-law, Diane, had a way of smiling while she insulted you. Like the cruelty was a gift she was generously wrapping for your benefit. She doesn't look like Michael at all, Diane said, peering into the bassinet at my 6-week-old daughter, Hazel. Not one bit. Are you sure about the timeline, dear? Michael heard it that time. He set his fork down hard enough that it clinked against the plate. That's enough. Mom, don't ever say something like that about my daughter again. His voice left no room for her usual deflection. And for a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Diane just adjusted her approach. Softer, slower, dressed up as concern instead of accusation. Dropped into conversations when Michael wasn't in the room to shut it down. I only mention it because people talk, you know, she told me once, alone in the kitchen. I'd hate for anyone to get the wrong idea. What none of us knew yet was that Diane's obsession with bloodlines was about to unearth a secret of her own, one she'd buried 34 years deep, long before Hazel was ever born. It came to a head at Hazel's first birthday party. Diane, 3 glasses of wine in, leaned toward my sister-in-law, loud enough for half the room to hear. I just think it's odd that a baby who supposedly belongs to my son doesn't have a single Whitfield feature. Not the nose, not the eyes. That baby is not a Whitfield. She called my daughter a bastard in every way that mattered, without using the word out loud in front of 30 guests, over a cake Hazel was too young to understand was for her. Michael was across the room before I'd even stood up. You don't get to say that about my daughter. In my house, in front of our family, he said, his voice sharp enough that the room went silent around us. You've made your last comment about this. Mom, we're settling it properly, with a lab. Not with wine and insinuation. Diane's smile flickered. I'd welcome it, she said, recovering. Good, Michael said. For everyone's peace of mind. Good, Michael said. Because we willed the paternity results came back 19 days later. Hazel was Michael's daughter, unambiguously. At 99.99% probability, it was never really in doubt for either of us. But I finally had something undeniable to put in Diane's hands. Michael wasn't satisfied with just ending the argument. He wanted something permanent enough that his mother could never circle back to it again. So he uploaded his own DNA to a consumer genealogy database. Half out of spite, half out of curiosity about a family tree Diane loved to invoke so selectively. The ancestry breakdown looked ordinary at first. Then he saw the top match on his DNA relatives list, a man named Thomas Ainsley, dead 8 years, sharing enough DNA to suggest a parent-child relationship. The profile was maintained by his niece, Patricia, who'd uploaded her uncle's sample years earlier as part of a family history project. Michael messaged her, unsure what he was even asking. She called 2 days later, and what she told him changed everything. Thomas Ainsley had worked with Diane at a marketing firm in the early 90s. During the first year of her marriage to Richard, Patricia remembered her uncle once mentioning a brief relationship with a married woman named Diane who'd gone back to her husband and never spoken to him. Again, Patricia had no idea that woman had a son 9 months later. To be certain, Michael quietly arranged a direct test against Richard as well. It confirmed what the database had already suggested. Richard Whitfield was excluded as his biological father, with no room for doubt. The woman who'd spent a year humiliating my daughter over an imagined resemblance had spent 34 years hiding the fact that her own son shared no Whitfield blood at all. Michael needed weeks to process what it meant for a father who'd raised him, loved him, and never known the truth. When he was ready, he didn't confront Diane quietly at her kitchen table. He waited for the family's annual reunion, the one gathering where every aunt, uncle, and cousin who'd ever heard Diane question Hazel's legitimacy would be sitting in the same room. He stood up after dinner, both reports in hand, and asked for everyone's attention. For the past year, my mother has told anyone who'd listen that my daughter doesn't belong in this family, he said, his voice carrying across the room. She questioned a 1-year-old's legitimacy at her own birthday party. So I want everyone here to see this. He held up Hazel's results first, then the second report. And I want everyone to see this too, because it turns out the only person in this family with a legitimacy problem was never my daughter. It was my mother 34 years ago. The room went utterly silent. Diane's face drained of color as the paper made its way around the table. Aunt to uncle to cousin, each of them reading what Michael had just made impossible to hide. I was 24, Diane said. her composed voice finally cracking in front of the family she'd spent a year performing superiority for. Richard and I were only married 8 months. Thomas was kind to me for 6 weeks, and I ended it the moment I found out I was pregnant. I told myself for 34 years it didn't matter, because Richard loved you like you were his own. Her hands were shaking now. I was going to take it to my grave to them. You don't get to explain your way out of this in front of the people you humiliated me and my daughter for, Michael said. You spent a year making a baby answer for something she didn't do. You spent 34 years making sure nobody ever made you answer for something you did. Richard didn't say a word. He stood, folded his copy of the report, and walked out without looking at her. He filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Not over the affair itself, he told Michael, but over 3 decades of silence built on top of it. Diane tried over the following months to rebuild what she'd broken. I sent her gifts for Hazel back unopened. Michael kept his relationship with Richard, who'd raised him with nothing but love for 34 years and didn't deserve to lose a son over a truth he'd never been told. The bloodline Diane had guarded so fiercely, in front of 30 guests, in front of her entire extended family, turned out to have been broken by her own hand 3 decades before Hazel was born. She spent a year interrogating a 1-year-old's right to belong. It took one lab report, read aloud in front of everyone who'd ever heard her doubt my daughter, to prove that the only bastard in that family tree had never been Hazel. It had been the silence Diane carried for 34 years, dressed up in someone else's name, and this time, everyone was in the room to watch it finally come undone.